Thank you. Thanks, Dave. Okay, this is a talk about indie studios. Can I just ask you guys before I start the talk, how many of you guys run your own independent studio already or are involved in one? Okay, how many people intend to at some stage when they finish their education? Run your own studio. How many people are investors? Okay, good. Right, this talk is aimed at startup studios and investors. And it's about the business models that work in the industry. And it's, for those of you who are not interested in this stuff, think about it like a history lesson, okay? And it'll be over in about 20 minutes. So, basically, my name's Jon Hare. I've been making games since 1985. I used to run a company called Sensible Software. We did games like Sensible Soccer and Cannon Fodder and Whizball, and you may have heard of some of these games, Megalomania. So we had a lot of success. I've had about 10 #1 games. Sold our company in 1999 to Codemasters. I've done lots of consulting in the meantime in business and games design, which are my two areas. So that's me. And what I'm going to talk about this time is the business models that have been used through the ages in different parts of games and what applies now to you guys with your own studios and how the best way to set things up to get it financed. Now, the reason this is critical is you make a mistake at the start of your company and say, give away half your company for 100 quid. Where are you going to go? So thinking about how you're setting up is very important. Often it's the dull bit no one on the team really wants to take on. But making a mistake in those early months, those early years, can actually kind of tie you up like a ball and chain for the rest of your life or career within that company. You may have to leave it to get some freedom. So if you're interested in this stuff, listen. So independent development through the years and how to survive the corporate invasion. Okay? This is about different game development eras. I've divided the history of games development into 3 eras. The first one's called Dark Ages. It's called Dark Ages because most of you guys won't know how we used to work then. How do we develop games? How do we sign development deals? How do we get paid? What are the financial structures? Then we've got the Middle Ages. These are the console years, okay? When the consoles came in, the business models changed. 3D came in, the budgets got a lot bigger, okay? This eventually gave way to the new age, which is now, which is the digital age. So since we first got smartphones coming in, tablets, cheaper production for games happened, new business models emerged. And as someone running a games company, I very much something with two facets. I'm a creative director, I lead things creatively. I lead the design, I sit on the shoulder of the team saying, no, that's not good enough, do it again, and write design documents. That's my development job. But my other job is to write contracts, to sit down with people, publishing companies, distributors, and do deals with people. And all of you with your own companies, someone's going to have to pick up the baton of business within the company, okay? It could be you do it independently as your only role. It could be you do programming or art or design, but you do the business bit as well. But someone in the company's got to do it, or it's all going to fall apart very quick. So, I'm now making a difference between the EU, or Europe, where we're from, and America, and Japan to an extent. Because history's been different. 1985 to 1994, 1985 or early 80s is when game development started in Europe, and specifically in the UK where we are. In this period, there was a time when we were the leading country in the world in game development in terms of making new IPs. Now we're currently about number 5 or 6 in the world. So we've been slipping. We're making less money, we've got less power and control. And this is the time when I made most of my money, I might add. This is my era, this one here. Then we've got rise of the consoles, 95 to 2004. This is when the PlayStation first came out. The Mega Drive started to pick up pace in about 93. Then we had Xbox coming in, and suddenly we're talking about consoles. 3D came in, production costs went through the roof, and the business models changed. And we'll talk a bit about what those monies were later. Then we've got this, the mobile and digital revolution, shaking it up. So guys like you can easily get involved and make games. The big question is, how do you make money and pay your rent, you know? So when you make that transition from being a student to actually doing it as a job, you start to think about things like, how am I going to pay for my house and my food, and, you know? And the fun bit of making games becomes not fun when you're poor. And the idea that you can make a good quality game as an evening job whilst you're doing another job somewhere else to try and pay some money doesn't really work if you want to make top-end stuff. So, anyway, Typical developer ownership. This is what this is about. The home computer era, again, the era where I mainly did most of my successful games, small privately owned businesses. Our company, Sensible Software, was me and my mate from school, 2 of us running a company. The kind of way you guys might be setting up with 2, 3, 4 people. We just owned it 50-50 and ran the whole thing all the way along like that, which was actually a lot of fun. And no one told us what to do, which was great. Console era, 95 to 2004, mostly controlled by corporations. So you got your, the smaller publishers quickly sold out. So you ended up dealing with big companies, companies like EA, Activision, all these kind of guys, controlling stuff, which means you had to make stuff through them to get it to market. As the budgets went up, our small companies could no longer afford the budgets. And the flavour in this part, and we'll come to this later, was very much for licensed games, not for original IP anymore, which meant that you had to go around what they wanted to do. The mobile era, we've now got the original games back again, but it's mainly VC funded. The model tends to be at the moment, get some funding to get your company going, sell some shares, you know? And this is what I'm talking about. How to do that, is it wise to do it at all? And if you do it, how you do it. In my era, we just made our own games, went to pitch it around to publishers when it was at what you'd know as probably about alpha. We'd take a demo and we'd go, look at our great game, pitch it to 2 or 3 people, get the best deal, sign it up. That money covered our costs, plus gave us a bit of extra money, and we got royalties on top of it. That's the way I'm used to doing business. So you're always covering your back with money. What's happened in recent years is those publishers have dried up. You can't go to 2 or 3 people to get your best deal. You know, even I, as someone with a big name in making games, have struggled with this for years. So it's not there. So the actual model at the moment is to go VC funding. The disadvantage is they're going to tell you what to do sooner or later because they own shares in your company. You know, and these guys are quite big, powerful people, and you guys are just starting out. So in the US, game development eras were different. The US didn't really have the home computer boom. You know, the Amiga, the Commodore 64, the Atari ST, they did nothing in America. Okay? They only had VCS and NES and DOS. DOS being the old PC games. So some companies did emerge as good companies from the DOS kind of games, people like EA, LucasArts, Sierra, Origin. They started off there. VCS and NES were almost closed shops. You know, VCS was Atari. Atari were controlling all the development, and NES was Nintendo who controlled all their development. So in reality, there wasn't much room for independent developers in America. The point being, they never had the indie era that we did in the Dark Ages, because it was mainly closed shops of either platform-led stuff or big companies, or small companies that came quickly big. They had the same consoles and digital revolution. It's the same for them. But this, for America, represents the first chance to be independent. That's why we hear about it being indie like it's a big new deal. It's not a new deal. It's an old deal. We had it before. Everyone's just forgotten about it. Okay, here's a US typical developer ownership. The prehistoric console era, as I've called that early era in America, was hardware company controlled. People like Nintendo, Atari, or private companies, but ones that became quickly big, companies like EA and LucasArts. Not tiny little companies like ours, which grew to 20 people. You know, George Lucas was pretty rich before he set up LucasArts. So he had a little bit more power. Modern console era, controlled by corporation, pretty much the same, and mobile era VC funded. What you're seeing here is America never had the independently owned small games bit that we had in Europe, okay? Modern indie gaming is a VC-backed US-led directive. Why is it now? The digital market has broken consoles. Channels need more content, because most of the money is going to the channels. That's who's really getting the money here, okay? They want content. And VCs need new corporations. So the VC way of thinking is, we just get a new big corporation again. They're not interested in little developers like we used to run, getting royalties here, there, and everywhere in an old publishing model, which could have been books or music or whatever. They want to grow something to get their shares going up and up and up and up and up, so they can get more money coming in that kind of way that they grow tech companies. Now the reality is, most of you guys, if you're successful, you're not going to turn into Zynga or Facebook, or you're unlikely to, and you're unlikely to turn into King.com, who've done this kind of thing extremely well. If you're extremely lucky, you'll turn into a company like we ran, or some of the numerous successful smaller development companies that have existed over the eras, or even like the company that made Limbo, that kind of company, which is quite small, which has had a hit. That would be a massive success for you guys. That doesn't require loads of shareholders. It doesn't require to set yourself up like a Bay Area tech company backed by VCs looking for a minimum of 15 million exit, you know? So when you're setting your company up, think about what you're likely to do through the history of that company and set up the business models appropriately. Europe already had creatively and financially independent game development before indie. This big indie thing in Europe is a lie. We already had it. In fact, this indie is not independent. Why? Because most of the time, they're working with VCs and they don't have all their shares, so they're not independent. Yeah? Independent means in control. Creative and financial power in your hands. So, when did we have this? In the small privately owned era back before 95. Why are most indie developers aware of the early European independent development scene? Here's your answer on the screen. Most internet content came from the US during or after the console era when it was controlled by corporation. So the story we experienced in Europe isn't that commonly found on the internet. You know, just recently we've got a film coming out called Bedrooms to Billions. I don't know if it's been screened here. It's been screened in some unis across the country, which tells the story of the UK development industry in the early times. But it's good to learn about this, not just from a historical point of view, to pick the bones of the good deals we used to do, how we used to do licensing deals, sales deals, without having to sell shares in our company. We'd sell shares in our games, if you like, on royalties. Why do a lot of old developers, such as me, sound bitter? Why don't they give indies a bit more respect? This is the answer. Older devs blame small indies for devaluing the market. Now let me give you some history on this. I signed with my partner the first game we made in 1986 when we set up our company, and we got a £5,000 advance with a company called Ocean, who were the biggest publisher in the UK at the time. We thought we'd made it. We came back on the train, smoking cigars, eating the dinner. You could smoke on trains in those days. In the dinner carriage, eating some food. We got a 15% royalty and a £5,000 advance. It was a lousy deal. They never paid any royalties. They always seem to say zero at the bottom. But it was our break, okay? By the time we get to going through loads of different deals with loads of publishers through about 15 games we made, by the time we get to 1995, we're selling games for £1 million advance on 50% royalties, okay? Now, we spent, us and the other development companies in the UK at the time who were big, 10 years talking to each other. What kind of royalties can we get now? What kind of advances can we get now? What kind of licensing deals can we get now? Learning from each other to take a little infant industry to something where we're getting £1 million advance a game. That means you're guaranteed to receive £1 million, even if your game sells 0 copies, right? That's the world I come from. And I look at this current thing where people are selling games for nothing, with no guarantee of income, and all I see is a destruction of what we built up back in the old days. Now the question is, the way we used to run our business was very safe. We very rarely put ourselves in financial jeopardy because we did good business deals and we learned over time to back up what the company was by guaranteeing our income, and also making sure that the money we were paying to our staff was fixed, not salaried, but fixed per job. If you're the programmer on Cannon Fodder, here's £30,000, you're on a 30% royalty of the game. If the game overruns and it takes 8 months instead of 6 months, you're still going to get £30,000. We're safe. We've now got fixed income and fixed outgoings. You understand what I mean? This stabilizes everything and allows you, what that gives you is creative power. You're not fearful financially whilst you're making stuff. It's important for all artists, technicians, people making stuff, to not be looking over their shoulder at the bottom line of the company all the time. It destroys creativity. You need stability, okay? Unfortunately, it is quite hard to get these deals now because the publishers have kind of collapsed. So we see this era now as VC funded and with no business sense. And this is not just from the developers there's no business sense. There's no business sense from the VCs either. Why are they investing in 20 student-created companies who are doing their own businesses taking the shares in them, looking at their accounts and stuff, when most of them are going to fail because they're just learning, why don't they just wait until they've developed a really decent game to alpha or beta and then invest in the game, not the company? So I think there's naivety on both sides. The VCs are trying to invest in our games companies like they're tech companies from the Bay Area, and they're not. They're little companies that make products. Even the really, really good ones are like that. You see what's happened with Rovio recently. It's a great story, case in point. Does anyone know Angry Birds, what number game it was for Rovio? How many they developed beforehand? 52, yeah, exactly. It was their 52nd game, okay? They were 7 years in. They were almost on the floor when Angry Birds came out. They expanded and expanded up and up and up. Do you know what happened a couple of weeks ago? They laid off 130 people. Because someone's come in. They're a great story both ways here. They just survived in what they would probably tell you was an awful time for them to get to that point of doing Angry Birds. Angry Birds comes out. Someone invests. They build it up and up. They see it mushrooming up like Zynga, because that's what the investors can see. They went too quick. They didn't see that it was a one game. It's a hit-driven business making games. And now, it's all collapsed again. They should have just invested in the product, like a publisher would. Just invest in Angry Birds. You know, take 50%, 60%, 70% of the income always from Angry Birds. Pay them lots of money, control the brand. That's how people should be working on both sides. What is the key difference between an early dev from the home computer era and from the console era? Home computer devs created and licensed own original IP. Most console devs console devs never got the chance, so lost the skills. So, what that means is, in the console era, you couldn't sell original IP. I'd had, at that time, 7 #1 games. 2 out of 3 of our games were #1 games, and we couldn't sell our original games because no one wanted them. They wanted big licenses. And so anyone in that console era from 95 to 2005 didn't have the chance to learn the skills of how to develop their own IP, how to work and license and do business in it. So it became a dead knowledge bed. Only people who worked before it remembered how to do these licensing deals. Many people you work with and talk to in development companies, and this includes investors, these guys come from the console era. They don't remember the era before, when we did sophisticated licensing deals, splitting up territories and platforms around the world for different periods of time, managing your IP. All of you, if you make your own games, until you sign a deal, that IP is 100% yours. You don't need to give it all away. You can carve it up, platform by platform, country by country, year by year, and protect it. The moment you sign a deal, that will go. Even worse, if you sign shares of your company, you can start to slip away and lose control. Sell 30% of your shares, get in 50 grand. Great, excited by the 50 grand. That runs out after 6 months. I need a bit more money, please. Okay, guys, here's another 50. We want another 20% of your company. Now you want 50% of your company. You've got half finished game, and you've got no control. It's a really bad long-term deal for anyone. Why can my indie company learn from the early devs? Ownership equals control. I keep on using the word control for a reason. Creative and financial control. Okay? Protect your shares and your IP. Do the right deals. Don't rush into it. Do the right deals. Focus for independent indie going forward is to be privately owned. If you take investment from people, make them part of your company and ownership. Part of your company a little bit more. Key factors are platforms. These are key factors on platforms. I've got to be quick, right? Yeah. Home computer era, there were open platforms. So Amiga, Commodore 64, you could make what you wanted. No one vetted anything. It was absolutely brilliant, to be honest. Console era, very controlled platforms. Sony, Nintendo, very rigorous, stringent things you have to jump through to get your game out. Has anyone put games out on Sony or Nintendo? They're very, very rigorous how you had to work. But the quality was guaranteed. If you look at Nintendo's output, it's almost flawless in terms of technicality because of that. And now we've got what I call open-censored platforms. Content-wise, it's a little bit more censorship than there used to be. There's certain things you can't do. You can't offend people about things. But they're open. They're a lot more open than the console era, which is great. So getting your product out there is great at the moment. It's never been so easy for, well, certainly since 1995. Gameplay dev time. So, in the 2D era, 16-bit and 8-bit machines, if we're making a game, 75% of the time they're making that game was spent making the game. Yeah, doing the game mechanics, doing the rules, making it fun, etc. When we go to the console era, this was the advent of 3D. everyone spent all the time doing the 3D. It was before great things like UDK and Unreal and these things. They didn't exist. People had to make their own 3D engines all the time. So the gameplay was very squeezed. That's why the games became very samey during that period, because everyone spent all the time technically making it display on screen properly, basically. So for designers, this was a frustrating time. In mobile era, I'd say it's about 50-50 now. We've got the engines, but we've got an awful lot of things to hook up to, such as Facebook and the various other things you have to hook up to make anything work properly, Flurry, etc., which takes about half your time if you're going to do it properly. Games per year. Here's the killer stat in this presentation. We made a game in 1992 called Sensible Soccer. It's our best-selling game. That year, 1,000 games were released on the Amiga. Fast forward 2002, PlayStation 2. Ironically, almost the same number on that platform as a lead platform of that era, 1,000 games. Fast forward to last year, on mobile, on iPhone, 100,000 games, right? That's 100 more times games on the lead platform of its era than we've ever had before. That is why people are struggling. There's too much product. It's so flooded. And what's interesting is, I can't remember anyone in the Amiga or the PlayStation 2 eras going, you know what, there's not enough product coming out. There's only 3 a day. I'm bored. No? We've got far too many products for an entertainment industry right now. It's almost become like a little hobby thing. Hobby makers and people who are aspiring to be making games are on that same level as people who want to do it for a profession, which at the moment is to your advantage because you're in the students you want to learn section, most of you. But when you transition the other side of the fence, for it being how you make your living, you'll see that it's a problem because there's so many games out there that the focus from the business side is all on marketing. How do people find my game instead of the other 999,999 that came out this year? You know, it's a bit of a problem. Original IP titles, I'll whiz through this stuff. Home computer era, I would say 80% original titles and about 20% were licensed. Console era, only 10% were original. The other 90% were all licenses, sequels, things like that. Films, sports tie-ins or sequels. Mobile era is about 66% original titles now. There are quite a lot of licenses and sequels out there, but it's much, much healthier. This is to your advantage with your own IPs. This is a chance which has not existed for a long time. Okay? 0 return games. Here's a disadvantage. In the home computer era, I reckon of the games that we made and developed to a good degree, only 5% didn't return anything. Okay? They didn't return anything because we didn't quite finish it or the deal fell apart at the end. In the console era, it's the same. The console era, one good thing is if you did manage to sign a deal, normally the game came out. On the mobile era, it's horrendous. 40% of apps on the App Store don't get a single copy sold. Okay? Total waste of time making it financially. Big consideration. Unit sales price. $2 to $30 in the home computer era, 15 to 75 in the console, 0 to 10 in mobile era. The big problem is the 0 here. 0 is a really bad price point. When I started making games in 1985, they were about £1.50. That's actual tangible money you can spend, you know? Third-party IP deal. So this is just talking about the money that you could get from doing a deal which ranged in the home computer era up to £1.5 million from normally a lot less. Console era went up to, dollars. $20 million deals. Everyone was so excited. But only a few people got these. And nearly all these companies were based in the States, by the way, in the Bay Area, funnily enough. But they existed in a lot of success stories we know. The mobile era, again, the budgets can go up. You can get that kind of advance, and it's really, really hard to get, okay? Advances are generally much harder to get now. That's the problem. And the royalty deals we were getting on third party, well, you can see the percentages there. Own IP deals. Now, on the own IP, we used to go up to 50%, which was great. So you're getting 50% of the money, which might sound bad to you, but someone else is taking all the risk for us as a publisher, remember. So this is a really good deal. We're stable, we own all our shares, and we're getting 50% of the upside, if there is one. It's brilliant. And the money we were paid acted as an advance against the 50%. So if we were given £100,000, that means for the first £200,000 of sales, we received nothing, because we'd already had that 50%. And then after that, we'd get. But that's a brilliant model, and it's a good way to work internally to cut to staff. The console era, you You can see on the new IP deals, they could go up to 20,000, but you'd really struggle to find someone to take on your new IP. So this is not really worth considering. Your chance of getting it's almost nothing. The mobile era, most people get their money not from royalties of games, but by selling company shares, okay? It's a new way of financing and doing stuff. The risk. Home computer are very low risk because you've got advances. If your advances were too low, the sales were low, it would be a risk, but it was very low. Console era, massive risk, you can't sell original IPs. Mobile era, even bigger risk than the console era, because why? You run out of funds, or you get low sales. Look at that risk. I mean, these are made up numbers, I'm making them up. They're not super studied, but I've been around a long time. That's a problem. So the key is to try and reduce it. Best aspects of each era, home computer, you retain all your shares and license your own IP. Console era, good fixed fees on third-party IP. They were good if you could get them. Open worldwide platforms, the best thing going on here. Worst aspects, difficult to break world market. For all our hit games, we never had a single copy sold in the States virtually, so we were only really in Europe. Console era, difficult to sell original IP, almost impossible. Mobile era, too many games, sale of shares. So it's all about market competition and keeping control of your company. For independent developers, yes? Okay. Okay, give me 2 minutes or 1 minute just to wrap. Independent developers totally thrive in the digital age. They need to learn the lessons of the past and use them in the future. Okay? So you're going to learn from what I've said about the past and use it in the future. Think about ways to work for true independence. Avoid selling over 20% of your shares, losing control of IP, being taken advantage of, playing like being a publisher when you're not, just use partners to do stuff you can't do, doing too many games at once, writing unnecessary tech, use things like you've already seen Mike demonstrate today, paying founders from the start. If you set up a company, first 6 months, you're going to earn nothing. If you're not prepared to do that, don't do it. You're going to put your company at too much risk, okay? And everyone in with you has got to do the same thing. And don't accommodate weak links. Don't accommodate your friend because you like him. If he's a bad artist, get rid of him. Things to do. Plan for realistic success. Plan for what you can achieve. Not a fantasy success, but a real success. Find publishing partners. Get people to work with. Cut them in. Find ways of doing royalty deals with people to cut in the money you're getting in so you haven't got to up front to them. License your IP for percentages. That's what I've just said there. License your IP per format. So you're going to help me by distributing it on iPhone and Android. Great. You get 30% of iPhone and Android income. But I'm going to hold the Sony stuff because I might do a deal with someone else on that or someone else in France. Build international contacts. Control with contracts. Work with lawyers and accountants. You need them. Understand how they work. You get control in business from contracts. So someone's got to learn that. Reward all staff with percentages so everyone's incentivized to be successful. And third-party IP, it's good to do third-party IP deals for cash flow. So just keep things ticking over in the background. A little project like that can get income coming in. We turned over $8 million in 13 years of my company, Sensible Software. As 100% owners, we made $4 million profit. Okay? So we made 49% profit on average over 13 years running on this model I've talked to you about. And after that, we sold the company. So we didn't sell a single share to make that money. Then we sold the company afterwards and made more money. This is what happens when you retain power in your company. Do not sell shares cheaply as indie developer. Do not sell shares cheaply as an indie developer. License partners' percentages your IP, not your shares. And remember, indie means independent. Okay? That's the end of the talk. Thank you.